Hey everyone, welcome to Happy to See Me, the podcast that puts the spotlight on the overlooked and underestimated. I'm Erika Casupanan, and this episode I'm speaking with my pal Leroy Fontaine from the Traitors Canada, and we are talking about Indigenous representation and his children's book, Sekweha, the Super Kid. But first, I love to start each episode by talking about something I was happy to see this week. To give everyone a bit of context on the timing, I do record these episodes in advance. So right now where we're at, it's a week after the election. By the time this episode comes out, the world could be totally different. Who knows? But right now where I'm sitting, we've just come off of a week of a lot of people feeling fear and anxiety and sadness. So it is challenging for me to think about what is something I am happy to see. And I want anyone to know that if you had been going through these feelings this month, you are not alone. And I think in times like this, it's so important to be connected and to remain in community and to uplift the voices of the communities that may be marginalized. And I hope that through this podcast, it does provide a space where we can hear these stories of people who might have been underestimated or who might be able to validate our own experiences of feeling underestimated and not feeling alone, or through hearing the stories of people who might have had a life experience that's a bit different. We see a point of view that is new to us and it introduces us to this idea of being allies. I hope that people can find comfort or connection in their communities. And truly, it is an honor that at a time like this, you're willing to spend a few minutes with me in your week. So thank you so much for being here. And I do want to share, I did have some happy news this week in the spirit of storytelling. And I hope that I can share this with you all because you are all responsible for this moment. I am so proud to share that my show, Happy to See Me, has been nominated for 5 Canadian Podcast Awards. I've been nominated for a few awards over the last few months, haven't won any of them, but thank you so much to everyone who's voted. And these awards mean so much to me because a lot of the awards are nominated by people in the Canadian podcast industry. So these are my peers. These are people who gave me advice and helped me to get my show started. And it's so incredible and such an honor to be recognized by them. So I'm nominated in a few categories. One that I'm really proud of is Outstanding Debut for a Series. Wow. And another one, which I wanted to share, is the People's Choice Award. So this is the only award that can be voted for outside of the podcast community. And I would love if you have taken anything out of this show over the last few years, if you would please consider throwing me a vote for the People's Choice Award. This one is an easy one to vote for. It's just a few clicks, and I will include that in the show notes. And in this moment of mixed emotions, I want to say thank you to everybody for supporting the show. I want you to know that you have my commitment that I will continue to share stories that I hope can validate and feel connection and bring light to important stories through this podcast. So that is what I was happy to see this week. And I'm really happy to share that this week's interview is with my pal, Leroy Fontaine. So you might recognize him from the Traitors Canada. He lasted on the show a lot longer than I did. And now he is the author of a children's book called Sekweha, the Super Kid. This is an incredible book that talks about traditions, connection, community. And I think whether you are Indigenous or not, this is a book that can really resonate with you. In this episode, we are talking about Indigenous representation and the importance of staying connected to one's culture. So if you are someone who has felt disconnected from your culture, whether it's your Indigenous culture or a different type of culture, maybe it's your home country's culture, I think this is a really important episode for you. And I'd say share this episode with anybody who has had that experience because Leroy talks about growing up on an Indigenous reserve, feeling disconnected from his culture as he got older, and then making the real effort to make sure he and his family are still in touch with the traditions and the values. So I think we should just get into it. This is my interview with Leroy Fontaine. I hope you enjoy it. Well, I feel like we were ships passing in the night. I feel like we had so much potential to be friends, but it got ripped away from us so quickly because of the Traitors.
Oh, you know what? I honestly wish that you and I had spent more time on that show because I'll always remember that time when we were in the vehicle right off the bat and everybody knew exactly who you were. And I was like, and I didn't watch that season yet. So I was like, oh my God, what am I going to get into here? She's obviously somebody of power. So I was like, okay, here we go.
Wait, were people really scared of me on this show?
Well, you obviously know you ended up getting the snip pretty early, but everybody knew who you were, what you did on Survivor. Like, it was one of those moments where I didn't know who you were initially, but I found out pretty darn quick when we got in the manor.
You were probably like, oh, this is some nice girl who's in the car with us.
Yeah. She's pretty quiet. She's nice. She's holding a conversation, and then boom, winner of Survivor. Pretty cool.
Yeah, it was sad. I mean, we've done multiple reality shows, so, you know, you win some, you lose some, and it's fine. But I remember getting into the car, and it was you, Rick, Nazila, and Donna and I. And I remember driving into the manor. I'm like, oh, I really like all these people. Like, this is going to be a fun show because at the very least, we're all going to hang out. This is going to be fun. And then I went home. And the reason I was sad is I was like, oh, I really liked everybody, and I wanted to actually spend time and play the game. I knew that the cards were stacked against me for the win, but I'm like, oh, this is like a group I could have fun with. So it's a shame that we didn't have more time, but now we get to talk.
Yeah, I feel like we all connect even after the show. It's a really cool thing. And I'm sure you've experienced it on Survivor as well. You build such a relationship with all the people on the show, whether you've been there for a minute or you've been there till the end. And it's pretty cool to be able to say, hey, listen, I know Erika from Survivor and look at us now. And same thing with Rick. And we all kind of talk about each other that way. And it's really cool how we all come together, right? Even after the show.
You were lucky. You got to stay there a lot longer than I did. You made it all the way to the end. For a lot of people who are listening, I'm sure the last time they saw you was when you narrowly missed out on the win on Traitors. And if anyone hasn't watched, I'm not going to spoil exactly what happened, but have you recovered from that loss?
Yeah, I'd say yes. It was really cool to be a part of the experience right from the beginning. And all of us talked about it before. We said, I just want to be here long enough to experience the game, at least, you know, all parts of the game. So for you to go home early, like it was just like you missed out on those other pieces of the game that I think you would have been absolutely amazing at after watching back on Survivor. But it was really cool to just like go through those different stages of Traitors and get to the point where obviously I didn't get to finish the deal, but that loss has been, initially it was kind of hard, but I quickly bounced back after too, knowing like it's a reality show, it's a TV show, it's a game at the end of the day, even though there's like money attached to it and that pride of winning a show is attached to it. But regardless, I feel good about it. And I'm just glad to be a part of that whole, you know, genre of Traitors, the Traitors family now.
Yeah. And you did so well. I read this interview that you did a few months ago where you talked about the skills you have as a firefighter. So you talk about work ethic and remaining calm and teamwork. And that helped you a lot during your early days as a faithful and doing the challenges. But then that may have aroused suspicion towards the end of the game. So how does it feel to have some of these positive qualities that I'm sure you're so proud of actually hurt you in a game like Traitors?
Yeah, that's a funny thing. I went into this actually wanting to be a traitor. And so when I wasn't chosen to be a traitor, because I originally wanted to go and I was going to be like, I'm going to try to win this game as honest as I possibly can, playing the game with some dignity and not letting the game take control of me. So when I went into it and I didn't get selected as a traitor, I was like, okay, good. Like I can play like this faithful. I can really just play who I am, create these relationships and just be me. And so at the beginning, obviously you saw like creating relationships and creating these bonds with all the people on the show, but I didn't even really pick up on the ending because of how it would have negatively affected me until obviously the end. And I still thought at the end that there was enough faithfuls in the game that I could continue to just be me and play this honesty game.
Yeah.
But obviously something happened and it backfired on me. And clearly shocked me too, right?
Yeah, it was so heartbreaking to watch. I mean, because I knew the outcome, you know, we all find out the outcome of the show before it airs, but we all have to keep it a secret as per our contract. But then even watching it and knowing what was coming, I was still like, oh my gosh. And you went out with such grace and you went out with such class. But all this to say, I do love Mike. I will say, like, I love Mike. If anyone was to win as a traitor, like, I'm so happy it's him.
Yes, absolutely.
He did a magic show in Niagara Falls, and my family and he got us tickets, so we went out to see him. And he was so sweet. And I was like, you know what? At least if I'm going to go down first, the guy who took me down won. So I'll take that.
No, he is amazing. And he's an amazing human being outside of this. Like, and that's the really cool thing about him is that he played an unbelievable game as a traitor in that show, but he's also an amazing human being off the show, which is like, kudos to you. You deserve that one because you played us and you played this well.
Yeah. Because when I've talked to people who watch the show, they're like, Mike looks like a weird guy. I was like, okay, one, Mike is a weird guy, and I'm sure Mike would admit that he's like a quirky guy, but Mike is so awesome. I feel like the show didn't fully capture how awesome he truly is, like an amazing guy.
Unbelievable. And I've had conversations with him since the show, and he's a class act through and through.
100%. And I know that The Traitors was your third reality show. And I've also read, when I was doing my research, that you said before going on a reality show, someone needs to be prepared to deal with the after effects of the show. Having done 2 reality shows, I feel like I understand what you're talking about, but can you explain to the listeners what some of the after effects are?
So for me anyways, like, and I don't know what your experience was like, but this was my third. And in both of the 2 that were, so I did this big expedition one for 40 days in the wild. That's a long time to be with a group of people you don't know, first of all, and the energy that goes into it physically and mentally. But Traitors, for me, it took so much brain power, so much being switched on for the entire time to create these relationships and connect the dots and be under a microscope for that entire time by so many people. I came out of that show just drained. I needed a full reset. There's 2 parts to it. There's that part where I feel like everybody needs to be aware of how much energy goes into a show like this and how emotionally draining it can be. But the other side is, just being aware that how you display yourself on a TV show is you have to be prepared for what comes after as well, with the public and how they perceive you and all these things, and maybe some questions or targeted attacks at you, right? Mm-hmm. So, and for me, that was kind of part of my way of being on the show, saying, hey, listen, I'm going to play me as best I can, not let the game change me. And that way I can walk away from the game being proud and happy with how I played as Leroy Fontaine and let the rest of the world see and experience that.
And I feel like The Traitors is a special kind of stress compared to other reality shows. I mean, I wasn't there long enough to go to a breakfast or to even go to a real round table, so I didn't get to experience it. But after talking to people on our cast, especially the Big Brother folks, and they were saying that it was way more stressful than Big Brother. And I feel like the round table, and even the fact that it's shaped like a circle and it's round, and the point of sitting there is to be accusing people, that's a special type of stress that I think is different than tribal council or any other similar setup from another reality show. But I also think there's probably something stressful about, when I think of Survivor, you go in and everybody knows that they have to be dishonest to a level. Whereas with The Traitors, so many people can go in and are immediately relieved to know that they can be honest. Like, you went in to be honest. And there's probably something that is so jarring and so stressful about knowing you're being honest and then everybody's still accusing you of being a liar.
Yeah, I think that's always the hard part. Even for me at the end, playing like an honest game, I got pegged as, hey, you're being too quiet, you're under the radar, and being accused. It's stressful. It's hard to sit at that table. Other reality people from Big Brother, even Survivor, like, these are intense games. This is social strategy to the peak. And for Traitors to be on that level of, wow, like, I'm exhausted. And for Big Brother and Survivor people to say that obviously speaks volumes for what Traitors is all about and how much goes into it.
Yeah, what a crazy show. How do you deal with when you're being accused and you're telling the truth and everyone is like, okay, say something to defend yourself? How do you even figure out what to say besides I'm telling the truth?
I don't know. You go with it. You go with the flow and you just try to like piece things together and just say, hey, listen, like, I'm telling the truth. I always try to have a couple points of why I would be telling the truth with discussions with other people and try to validate myself through those pieces. And I think that's the only way that I kind of kept myself out of being on the radar, because my name did come up, and maybe we didn't see it on the actual show, but my name came up a couple times earlier because of how quiet and calm and collected I was and not saying a whole lot. But there was a lot there where my name did pop up. So I had to come up with these scenarios of, well, I had this conversation with this person and this is why I'm telling the truth. And so it was always about like hanging on to those little tidbits of information I had with somebody else and pulling that back up when I needed it, just to keep me from being targeted. It seemed to work for the time being.
Hey, I mean, it got you to the end. So if anybody is listening, this is the advice for how to play as a faithful and get far in The Traitors.
You got to finish the deal, though. Doesn't count if you don't finish the deal.
We win some, we lose some, right?
Yeah, you're right.
On this podcast, I love to put the spotlight on people and their stories that have been overlooked or underestimated. So have you ever felt underestimated?
You know what? I've always had like a little bit of underestimation, especially like when I was younger. So earlier in my life, I dealt with a lot of things growing up in a First Nations community under like troubling situations in my family and stuff like that. And so me as a young boy coming out of that situation, I don't think people really saw who I was until later when I started proving myself that, hey, I am capable of this. I am able to accomplish this. And it was through my own personal actions later where people started to respect that, oh, look at Leroy. Oh, he's done this or he's done this. But earlier in my life, I was definitely underestimated in a lot of ways. But it's really cool how you can change and shift the minds of people as you move through those things, especially like I'm a person who chases dreams and goals. And when you start accomplishing those dreams and goals along your journey, people really start to appreciate what you're capable of and really see who you are as a person and like what you're truly capable of. And I love that. And I love being that person to this day because I'm that trailblazer for all those people who are overlooked or underestimated.
I find that people love an underdog after they've already accomplished something, but people don't like the underdogs at the beginning when they're trying to accomplish something. When people are in the phase where they're making it happen, I think that everyone loves to look down on them. But once they have that success, then it's like, yay, amazing. So you have to figure out how you're going to persevere to get to the other side. How did you figure that out?
Trusting myself. I think one of the biggest things was, for me, it was earlier in my life, I had mentors and coaches and people that basically stepped up and allowed me to take those initial first steps. But once I got those initial first steps underneath my belt, it was more about believing in myself and knowing that I can do it and building that reassurance that if I just do what I'm supposed to be doing, follow my dreams, passions, and goals, that I'll get to where I need to get to. And that's literally shaped my entire life since a young boy. And so now I speak on this stuff as well too in community and through young Indigenous youth conferences and stuff like that. And that's my message to them, is that you do have the ability. It's just, you got to start believing in yourself and give yourself that opportunity to just take those initial first steps and prove to yourself that you can do those things and the rest will come.
There's so many amazing chapters to it, from growing up on the reserve to becoming an athlete and then becoming a firefighter and then reality TV stars. So could you give a bit more background on what life was like for Leroy?
Yeah, so like growing up on the reserve. So the reserve is a isolated First Nations community that's segregated from the major cities. So it's a First Nations community kind of plotted away. There's a whole backstory to that. We don't have to get into that, but it's basically a First Nations community, Indigenous community. And so growing up in that community, my whole family still lives there to this day for the most part. But I grew up immersed fully in my culture as an Indigenous person until about grade 6. And then I moved into the city where I wanted to go to school, play sports. And so I got involved in football. So football was like that sport for me that like put me through to the next level. So I ended up going to school. I ended up going to college. I ended up playing at the university level and eventually, almost getting into the pros. So that's kind of the trajectory that it took me on. And then eventually led me into doing something after football, which is team-based, helping the community, being involved. And that led me right into the fire career. And ever since, I've been in that career for about 11 years now.
The community values from growing up on the reserve seem to have followed you into all of the other pursuits you did.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's always about community. For me, I'm a community raised individual. If it wasn't for all the people that, from my home community, but all those mentors, teachers, coaches, friends, all those people that stepped up for me and helped give me those opportunities, I wouldn't be here where I am today, being able to give back and help the next generation. For me, it's nice to be able to give that back to the next generation of young minds that are wanting to do the same. So I'm giving back to the community.
For sure. And I want to know how things have changed in terms of the representation you've seen for Indigenous people, because I don't know, from the outside looking in, to me, it looks like over the last few years, there's been a lot more mainstream conversation about Indigenous reconciliation. Is this something that you have felt too as an Indigenous person? And how does it feel now to see these Indigenous issues and culture gain a bit more public attention?
Since the first apology from the Canadian government with the Harper government, it's come a long way. And it started with that. So my parents are both residential school survivors. And seeing that transition from the apology to everybody accepting that, okay, this actually happened in our history, to where we're all acknowledging that the residential school systems, the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, like all these different things that happen in history, we're all acknowledging that happened. And so where we are now, and I think there's still tons of work that needs to happen, but seeing where we are now, and even for the next generation, we still have work to do, but it's nice to see in the workplace, in the education system, with colleagues, friends, family, we're all starting to work towards a better reconciliation, a future for all of us. And I think it's been great. It's been moving fairly fast, but I think there's still so much more that we can do as a society.
100%. There's always room to make more progress. There's always room for more representation. And you actually, aside from your multiple reality TV stints, you actually have been helpful in increasing Indigenous representation too. And I want to congratulate you on your book, Sekweha the Super Kid, your children's book. Can you share a bit more about this book and the premise of the story?
Yeah, Sekweha the Super Kid. It's actually a story about my life. So growing up on a First Nations community. So the premise of the book is about my life growing up in the First Nations community. Sekweha means for the youth in Dene language from my home community. And so the book is written for the youth and to represent the youth and all the youth. So for me, it was a way to give back to my story to the youth of all these Indigenous communities, but also people of other cultures that basically struggle with cultural identity and that cultural loss as they pursue certain things. For me, I moved away from my community and my family to go and pursue goals and dreams. And along the way, I moved a little bit further away. So there was more and more time and space between me and my culture and my roots. So I didn't get to practice as often. So over the years, as I got older, I finally realized I was like, I'm distancing myself from my culture. And it wasn't until I had my kids where I started to realize, okay, I need to be the bridge, not the barrier between me and the next generation. And so that sparked me to want to write this book and share with young Indigenous minds and young minds in general about staying connected to your culture along this journey, because it can so easily be lost as we navigate the world on our journey to our goals and dreams. And so Sequoia represents that. But there's also little things in there too about allyship and reconciliation, which I've always had positive relationships with a lot of people along my journey. And it's just nice to be able to see everybody come together in my life. In the end of this book, there's a piece of that's shown, and it's really cool.
There are so many themes that stuck out to me in the book. And as you said, I think a big theme was staying connected to your traditions and culture. And I think that anyone who is part of the group that is not necessarily the majority, like even me being an immigrant to Canada, I feel like I can relate in terms of trying to stay connected to Filipino traditions and culture. And I think that everybody can relate to it, whether they're Indigenous or not, because I think so many people have felt that disconnection. When you were saying that you wanted to be a bridge instead of a barrier to connecting to a culture, when you were getting older, what were some of the barriers for you to remain connected?
Well, like I said, it was more of that time. So when I moved away from my community, I moved to Fort McMurray, which is about an hour and a half away from my home community. And then I moved to Edmonton, which was like 5 hours from my home community, and ultimately to the other side of the coast in Halifax. So each of those steps just created more time and distance away from practicing my culture. And it wasn't until like later where I realized, you know what, like if I don't start reconnecting and practicing more often, then I'm not going to be able to have those tools and those gifts to pass on to them. So I need to involve them, and I need to be a part of this process of reconnecting and building up what my grandparents and my family had given to me, which I want to give to them. And I think it's important for Indigenous culture revitalization and reconnection for everybody. And, you know, if I want this to pass on, I'm going to have to put in the work. And we're all on that different stage of like reconnecting and relearning. So for me, I've realized that once I had kids that I have to put in the work. For example, like in the book, there's moments with my grandmother that I was doing some beadwork. We made some bannock. I used to go hunting and fishing with my grandfather all the time. I used to drum. So all these things that I would have done as a young boy, I never really practiced until just more in recent history. And so for me to do that, I need to actively engage my kids into doing that so that they get to be raised in that like I was.
It feels like a lot of responsibility. And I mean, I've interviewed people on this podcast who are parents. Maybe they were Indigenous or they were first generation immigrants or immigrants themselves. And I feel like a lot of parents do feel the pressure to make sure they pass on that culture to their children. Was there a moment, whether it was when you had kids or before you had kids, where you thought, oh my gosh, I have to make sure my kids stay connected to this culture?
So there's two parts that I always felt like I wanted to speak to the communities and Indigenous youth about pursuing dreams and goals. But it wasn't until around that time when I had my firstborn, and it sparked that. It was like, okay, well, if people are going to pursue their dreams and goals, that was kind of like the dilemma that I had. It was just you push so hard at these things, these external things, and you're driving ahead. I think it's just a normal thing in how we live our lives in our culture, like just in society, is we just push forward trying to accomplish these things. And we kind of forget about those things that are like important. Oh, we'll get back to those things. But it wasn't until I had my firstborn where I was like, hold up, let's slow down here. Some of this stuff can slow down and wait, but I need to focus on my kids, the culture, reconnecting, and giving back to other Indigenous youth, because the longer I would have went without reconnecting, it's just that much more time that my kids and other youth that I would be speaking to wouldn't have that exposure to our culture. That was a big spark for me. And that was one of the biggest reasons why I wrote this book, was because of my son, actually. So he's built into the book as a super kid. And I have this little cute picture of my boy Phoenix, who has this little blanket around his neck with his hand up in the air. And
oh my gosh.
He's one of the reasons why I was like, there needs to be representation and there needs to be inspiration for young Indigenous youth looking at themselves to a point and feeling that they are super kids and their culture is their superpower.
At the beginning of the book, there are all these images of Sequoia doing these activities with his grandparents, like you were saying, the beadwork, making the bannock. And if anyone hasn't had bannock, it is so good. So you have to get it. The drumming. Have you done any of these traditions with your own children?
We'll pull the drums out. We have this place called the Friendship Center here in Halifax. And so we take the kids to the Friendship Center to practice beading. We have a friend who builds drums, so he's been over to help us build drums with the kids. Anytime we have the opportunity to pull the drums out for them, we do. We go to the powwows with them. Basically, everything that you see in the book, whether we're doing it now or exposing them to it, that's kind of our steps to getting them engaged.
Oh, that's so incredible to see that. And then hopefully they can share it as well.
Oh, you know what? They're absorbing it so well. They love it. And it's really cool because like there's certain pieces that I know stick to them, because we'll be talking about something completely off topic. And then all of a sudden, hey, that's a part of our culture. That's a part. And I'm like, you know what? There it is. That's what it's all about. Yeah, yes. Mission accomplished. Yeah.
Another theme that was really clear to me in the book was around community and around sharing. As people read the book, they'll see that the people that Sequoia comes into contact with aren't the people from his original Indigenous community, but there are other people who are now being exposed to the traditions and the traditional items that he's bringing to the big city. Was there an Indigenous value around community that you really wanted to share within this book?
Well, there's two sides to that. So there was the part where community is so deep-rooted in the Indigenous culture, and it goes way back. But for me, it's more about, I grew up in that community, and I grew up and I was taken care of by a group of people. And for me to put that into the book was significant, because I wanted people to understand that we need to work together. So there's the Indigenous side and there's non-Indigenous side. And where we come together is where reconciliation truly happens. And we need those allies as well as an Indigenous person. And I think like when I was growing up and going through all of this, and what Sequoia goes through in this book is about community and bringing everyone together and how we can all walk the next steps together in reconciliation. And the allies come and help him bring his pieces back. And so that's where that mutual understanding that we can all help each other. And so at the end of the book, they're at a powwow, holding hands and united, moving forward. That was kind of the biggest message about community that I wanted to get across, that Indigenous and non-Indigenous people can come together and have a brighter future.
For sure. And like the first step to allyship is even being aware of another community and another culture. So it's incredible that with this book, you were able to raise that type of awareness. I think about back to reality TV. When I was on Survivor, there was a guy on my season who loved Big Brother. So he would watch all of the seasons of Big Brother Canada. So he was asking me all these questions about cultural things he didn't really have context for. So one of the things is the season that he was watching, I can't remember what season it was, but Kiefer was on Big Brother Canada, and he kept talking about Haida Gwaii. And if anyone isn't familiar with Haida Gwaii, it's this Indigenous culture that is in British Columbia, so a province on the west coast of Canada. So Deshaun was like, he keeps saying Haida Gwaii, what is Haida Gwaii? And I would explain, okay, like Indigenous people, the different cultures, they're in the west coast. And then I was thinking like, how cool is it that I'm like this Filipino Canadian immigrant in Fiji talking to this Black man from California about this small Indigenous group in the west coast of Canada. And it shows that by sharing and having that representation, where that impact can go, even if you don't really see it. Have you had moments like that that have really touched you as a result of either you being on Traitors or a reality show or even with the book?
Oh, so many. There's so many moments on and off the TV screen where I've had those conversations. And there's a lot, because I do a lot of advocacy in the workplace as well, too. And so a lot of discussions often come up about Indigenous culture. And I can only speak about my experience as an Indigenous person growing up from where I grew up. But it's always nice to have that dialogue about who we are and what some of our values are and how we hold ourselves. And really, a lot of the discussions come up about what's happened in the past as well, too, and how we're going to move forward. So there's a lot of dialogue, which I love. And it's always really impressive when I take these to the schools now, too, and read with the young minds. The questions that come out of them are unbelievable.
Oh my God, what are their questions?
I'm going to read to, let's just say, like pre-primary or kindergarten, grade 1 students, grade 2 students. And some of the questions are just so deep. Like, what does Indigenous mean? Oh, and like, I heard about the 7 sacred teachings, and which is in here as well. And so when I ask these questions, hands pop up. And this is non-Indigenous groups where hands pop up and they know the answer to what the bear means or what the eagle means in Indigenous culture, or have they heard of a medicine wheel and all these different things. And it's like these young minds are being educated now, and which is really cool. And so I get to have these discussions with the young minds and help encourage the learning in that process and like validate, hey, you're doing a great job, like amazing. But then to have like a discussion with somebody at work in the workplace about our culture and what it means to be an ally and standing up for somebody in the workplace and creating a welcoming environment. So it's just really cool to be involved in like every facet of Indigenous advocacy, because I get to sit at the table with other firefighters. And for some of the work that I've done over the handful of years working for this fire department, to sit down on Orange Shirt Day or even throughout different days to see moose hide pins and orange shirts being worn at the table, where I feel like these are my colleagues, these are my people, and you guys get me, you guys understand me, and you guys respect me. And that's a really cool thing to experience.
I have chills hearing that. That's so incredible to see. Again, like that is probably so different from when you grew up, right?
So different. Yeah, it's just so different. Like you grow up in a small town. There was always this borderline, like, racist type stuff or insensitive comments made around Indigenous people growing up. So it was like you were treated. You kind of like, you held it in sometimes. Where we've shifted to an entire side of the spectrum where it's okay to be proud. It's okay to stand tall. It's okay to say I'm Indigenous. It's come a long way over the past 20-something years, and more so in the last 10 years, where we can all stand proud and say I'm Indigenous and this is who I am. It's a really cool feeling.
I know you've been speaking. I know you've been doing advocacy work. When you are out there speaking, is there kind of like a point or a message that you usually share that really resonates with people? And what is it?
So my story is very intertwined. So some of it is about how I grew up, and then it's about the importance of having a dream. I had this dream, and that set the whole trajectory of my life as a young man, young boy coming out of my situation. And my situation wasn't good. Family dynamics, all these addictions. There was heavy stuff early in my life. And to come out of that with a dream was the first step in pursuing something a little bit better. But on that journey, all the positive things that were going on in my life, pursuing football, going pro, my career, education, all these different things, there was always something trying to pull me away from that. But there was also this gradual disconnection with my culture, my roots, as I was pursuing this, because I had the blinders on, and I was gone because I wanted to pursue these things. It wasn't until later I realized, I was like, my culture is one of the most important things. That is who I am. I felt like I was losing a bit of that until I had my family, until I started reconnecting and doing this work where I realized, like, this is the most important part of me. And I need to start sharing that with everybody, that we need to be aware of who we are and not lose that on the journey, because that's what happened to me until more recently. Some of that message is like, as you pursue your dreams and goals, just remember who you are and stay connected to your roots and your culture, because as Indigenous people, we should be very proud of who we are and where we came from.
Ooh, yeah, that definitely resonates. And I think that whether someone is Indigenous or not, I think staying connected to your roots and your values is so important. Oh my gosh, I love that. When it comes to the book, what is the main takeaway you want people to take from the story?
The main takeaway is what we just talked about. It's about that pride in your culture, like just staying connected to who you are, standing tall to be, for me, Indigenous, for you, Filipino, like it's just, that's who you are. That is your superpower. That is who you are. You offer that to the world. And Sequoia the Super Kid is that in this book. And he gets to share that with so many people. And he is a representation of what we all need to be, whether it's my culture or your culture. We offer the world, especially in Canada. Canada is that melting pot, right? It should be that melting pot. We should all be able to express and share our culture. And there's so much good in doing that. And for me, that's what I want to share with the world is be proud of who you are, where you come from, and good things will come.
Oh my gosh, an amazing message to end off on. Leroy, if people want to follow you and if people want to pick up your book, where can they do that?
Yeah, so the book is available on Amazon. So just search the title, Sequoia the Super Kid, and it's Cultural Cape. You can also find me on my website, which is leroyfontaine.ca, or on Instagram at Leroy Fontaine.
Oh my gosh, Leroy, I'm so happy we got to reconnect. I knew in that car you were cool, and I'm so happy I got to learn so much more of you beyond what you say at a round table.
Oh, you know what? I wish we had more time together on that show. I really do. I think there would have been I think you could have made it to the end. I think you would have won the whole thing.
Oh my gosh. I remember in my interviews, confession to everybody here, in my confessionals, I was like, if I make it through the first night, I'm winning. But I didn't make it through the first night. So here I am.
I believe it. I think you would have had a great way with people on the show. And I think you would have found your way to create all those relationships. And who knows, maybe that could have been you and I standing there.
I know. And guess what? Mike wouldn't have won if that was the case.
We can only just imagine.
Yeah, I know.
Who knows? He would have put some magic spell on us and figured it out anyways.
I've seen him do the magic. It's not bad. So
yeah, pretty impressive.
Leroy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to talk to you, and I'm sure there'll be more in the future.
Thank you so much, Leroy, for that inspiring conversation. And if you know somebody who is a parent and they want to share this inspiring, eye-opening read with their kids, make sure you share this episode with them so they can learn about Sequoia the Super Kid. Okay, so I love to end each episode by answering a listener question. And somebody asked me, how many clothes have you bought this year? So if anyone hasn't been following me on social media, I have challenged myself to only buy 15 fashion items this year. I normally love to buy clothes. And this year I really wanted to challenge myself to be intentional about what I brought in because one, I feel like I have so many clothes, so I should just enjoy wearing them. But also I've just been a bit more aware of consumption and all of that fun stuff. So right now, I don't know if it's posted on social media yet, but right now I am at 11 items I have purchased. So it is November and I am still below the goal. Let's see if I come in under the goal or not. But this has been a fun challenge because one, it's enabled me to feel more creative with the clothes that I already own, which has been a ton of fun. And the other is now I think so much about any potential purchase I want to make in terms of clothing. And that has found its way into other purchases I make. So even if I want to buy something for around the house, even if I am out and I see like little tchotchkes and stuff that I would normally buy without even thinking about them, now I stop and think, okay, is this something that I really, really want? If I can only buy a few things, is this one of the things I would get? And I find that overall, I am buying less stuff. So make sure you tune in on Instagram or on TikTok so you can see my 15 items challenge. And let me know if you would consider doing a fashion challenge like this. So thank you so much to the listener for asking that question. If you haven't already, I would love if you could subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you get your podcast. We are also on Instagram and on YouTube and TikTok at @HappyToSeeMePod. And if you would be so kind, I would love if you could vote for this show for the People's Choice Award at the Canadian Podcast Awards. I will link that in the show notes. Thank you so much for spending some time with me this week, and I will be happy to see you next Monday.